You're saying then that wisdom was the Son of God, pre-existing.
Yes, but given in a sort of a mystery or an enigma.
What does that mean?
Well, first of all, the word wisdom. We know what the word wisdom means.
Yes.
It's an abstract noun, but
Yes.
it refers normally to God's wisdom,
Yes.
and we understand it that way. But the way it's portrayed as a person in Proverbs is portrayed as a person that comes into being, which implies that person did not have a pre-existence in the mind of God prior to that. When it says God acquired wisdom and God begat wisdom, that is what I would call a logical inference from those statements.
Okay. My first question would be, who is prudence? Wisdom and prudence are, by the vast number of commentators, said to be personifications. That reminds me of the argument we have about the devil with the Christadelphians. I don't think many would agree with you. It doesn't make you wrong. But how do you know that wisdom isn't a personification like prudence?
It is presented I agree with you, actually, that it's presented as a personification.
Good.
But that's part of the mystery of this. So prudence is also a personification, and we do see personifications of the nature you're referring to at times in the scriptures. I think it is presented as a personification, but then when we get to the New Testament, when the Apostle Paul is tying this wisdom and this passage in Proverbs 8 with Christ in Colossians 1, that he's showing that it goes beyond that. And that's what part of the mystery is, that Solomon said he was presenting this as a mystery or an enigma. Paul talks about Christ and the Son of God as being a mystery. So I think the way I'm looking at it is different than the way you're looking at it. You're looking at it sort of progressively that, well, this is what it meant in the Old Testament, so therefore it's a personification. So therefore, in the New Testament, we have to retain this personification mindset. What I'm saying is that it's presented as a personification, but it's got some problems for that view. And the problem is that this wisdom, if it's only God's own wisdom, then God just acquired it.
Okay.
Which that's a problem for how do you work that in with a personification? And so what I'm saying is when Paul starts to identify in Colossians 1 wisdom as being Christ, that what he's doing is he's explaining how these apparently conflicting ideas actually work. And so I think what we have to do, and what I try to do is I try to take the apostles' interpretations of it over the difficulties that appear in the text itself, because the apostles are explaining. The New Testament unlocks the Old Testament and explains the mysteries of the Old Testament.
I see.
Okay, so that's how I would handle that. Okay. I think wisdom was a sort of an abstract way of portraying a real person that already existed when Solomon wrote this. All right, but it's being portrayed in a mystery or a mystical way, which there is conflict between whether you interpret it as merely God's own wisdom in his mind versus is this a real person? There's tension in the passage itself, because it's clear that, because wisdom is said to dwell with prudence and things of that nature, that concept of a personification is very clear in that sense. But when you see that God is acquiring wisdom and he's begetting wisdom, now we have a conflict, because now God has this wisdom for the first time. So there's a tension there. All right. So what I'm saying is that the tension that is evident in reading that passage literally is explained in the New Testament by the apostles. And that's why I introduced with talking about the various mysteries, and most of it has to do with Christ, with God and his Son, the various mysteries that are talked about in the New Testament.
Let me ask you this.
I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right. I'm just saying this is the way we view it. This is the way
you're seeing it. It sounds to me that wisdom has to be as old as God on your argument. He can't acquire it, you say. So wisdom is a second member of the Godhead, or what?
No. Wisdom is the one that God beget at the beginning of creation. This is what wisdom claims in Proverbs 8, to have been begotten before God began to create all these things.
But he had wisdom before that, though. You said that God could never be without wisdom. So that's not quite clear to me.
Okay, God could never be without wisdom as an abstract quality, right? That's for sure. But when he says that he begets wisdom and he acquires wisdom says actually that wisdom has been acquired by God and has been begotten by God. Now what's happening is wisdom is claiming to have an origin at a particular point in time, and that point in time is before God created everything else. So, and also wisdom is said to be the beginning. God, procured wisdom as the beginning of his works. So that places wisdom as the very beginning, and it's sort of given the title of the beginning right there in Proverbs 8:22.
So wisdom is the Son of God, is what you're telling us. Jesus is.
I'm telling you that,
wisdom.
right. I'm telling you that Proverbs 8 is giving us the Son of God in sort of a mystery form, so that, and it's hidden that way on purpose. I mean, what does Paul say in 1 Corinthians chapter 2? He says that, we declare to you the mystery of God, the hidden wisdom that was foreordained before the world for our glory. And he says, whom none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory, which is clearly talking about Christ.